So welcome, everybody. I just wanted to say that you may know the mission of the Art Clinic Online, which functions as a nonprofit now because we're sponsored by Glen Echo, which is a 501c3, is to create exactly what we're doing now, which is dialogue, relationships, and community among artists of all levels in the DMV area. And we meet every other Saturday. So please tell your friends, tell us to include you in our invitations. We don't bother you too much. We just send every couple of weeks, we send reminders of the meeting. And please join us because today we have a real treat. Amanda Jirón-Murphy is joined by the person who nominated her, who is Ian Zipfel, and both wonderful friends of the ACO. Ian for a little bit longer. Amanda is the curator and resident artist and collector liaison at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Arlington. And she curates residence exhibits, manages the artist residency program and museum collectors program, and we'll let her tell us about it, which is wonderful. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Amanda and Ian, who's going to say a little more about her. Go ahead, Ian.
Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you.
I'll just dive briefly into the bio a little bit more, which is extensive, and then maybe just share a quick personal story on Amanda. In addition to the Museum of Contemporary Art Arlington work that Mariana was just mentioning, Amanda from 2012 to 2019 was the gallery director at Hamiltonian, where she directed and curated exhibitions, art fairs, and projects for an international roster of over 40 mid-career and emerging artists. And she's also been a guest speaker, panel moderator, and guest curator at George Washington University's Textile Museum, the Hirshhorn, Smithsonian's Luce Foundation for American Art, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, as well as MICA. She holds a BA in art history from John Cabot University in Rome and an MA in modern and contemporary art and connoisseurship from Christie's. Just a brief personal story. The first time that I had gone to MoCA, which was like a random Friday, I think a year and a half ago, they were doing these curator-led tours, and Amanda was there. And she graciously took me around for about an hour and a half, talking me through the exhibit, inviting any questions I had. And I just came away super impressed with not only how down to earth she was, but her passion for the art really came through, and have kept in touch since. So without further ado, I'll let you take the floor, Amanda.
That was such a nice intro. Thank you so much. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. Every opportunity I get to talk about my life and times in my career, I actually, it helps me appreciate what I've done and the amazing people that I've been able to work with. So today, I thought I would give you an overview of how I got where I am. But first, I wanted to begin at the beginning or the end, I don't know, of the presentation, but the current moment, because I feel like if I go on and on about what I've done, we aren't going to get to what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with what I'm doing and what's coming down the pike. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes or so, 45. Feel free to ask questions. Do we want to hold questions until the end, actually? Would that be better?
We could do it. If you want to ask the question, type it into the chat, or you can save it till the end. Okay.
Let's go that way. All right. So I'm going to begin at the current moment. And I believe Marissa Stratton is on, or Miss Marissa Long is on the presentation as of right now. Let me see here. So what I'm doing, within the next month, I am going to be taking people to the studio of Hedia Ilchi, the artist Jackie Crocetta, and Andrew Hladky, and go to visit Pazzo Fine Art, which is in Kensington, Maryland. And like shameless plug, I'm starting with all of my promos now. I'm going to put the registration for this in the chat so you can see where you can sign up for this. Oh, I might not be able to do that while I'm presenting, actually. Let me see here. Well, okay, we'll hold off on that. So I'm taking people to visit a studio. And this is part of my role in the current job that I have, where I take people who are curious about contemporary art, but may not have footing in the world, to see where people make it, how it gets presented, and meet the people behind the scenes that make the stuff that you look at when you go to a museum or a gallery. Hedia actually went through the residency program at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington, which is where I currently work, when it was Arlington Arts Center. And she is now represented by a pretty major gallery in DC, Hemphill Fine Arts. I'd say that George has been in business for over 30 years, so he is one of the people that you would want to be represented by in the district. And Hedia is wonderfully down to earth and has some extremely dreamy paintings that are rooted in Persian miniature painting. She's of Iranian heritage, but it sort of mixes with some really wild art historical references that she's very into, like Bruegel and some Dutch northern landscapes. But the net sum of what she's been doing lately makes you feel like you're in this funny purgatory place. It's very otherworldly stuff, so it should be very exciting. That is happening on November 23rd from 5 to 8 p.m. At the end of the presentation, once I've gone through my slides, I'll make sure that you can register for that there. Now, this is part of the collectors program that I run. I've been taking people on outings in and around the DMV to see creative, unusual stuff that you probably wouldn't know about unless you were in the art world. So this is just one example of that. Then, oh, I'm really like rusty on this. Here we go. This is a still from a show that I am working on with a wonderful artist named Marissa Long. Marissa, I think, is in the room here. And the show, this is the promo image that will go on our press release and on the postcard. It's kind of creepy. That's by design. The work is called Blister Pearl. And I have a video. I'm hoping that I can play it. Let's see if it will take me there. This is super sneak peek. I'm telling you right now that like most people probably wouldn't be able to see this. This was shot on my phone yesterday. So this is a sarcophagus-like structure with this opening in the middle full of crystals. And you'll be able, it's about chest height, and you'll be able to walk around it. You will not see this. This is, like I said, super behind the scenes, but it's very impressive because Marissa's been working on this for extensively now for over the last year, I would say. We've been in talks about this for a very, very long time. Hers is the next solo exhibition, which is on the upstairs floor of the museum, which is where all of the artists have their studios. So that's coming very, very soon. Programming to be announced. Very excited about that. And then I wanted to also show you a video of a show that I am also working on or just finished working on. This is the catalog for the group show Hot Goss, which I just curated for all of the resident artists. I want to name them by name because I don't have a slide for each of them in this slide deck. But I just got these in print. This is the catalog, all of the artists listed. I got to write an essay about the show. The show is about the way that the resident artists in the program, of which there are 12, were able to interact with each other through their work. So in the last couple of years, obviously, because of COVID, we haven't had as much one-on-one interaction in person. And art never exists in a vacuum. People are always absorbing ideas from one another. And I think especially in a studio setting like the one that I'm running now, when you can walk into somebody's studio and get inspiration from what they're doing, it will invariably rub off on whatever you do. So the whole premise of the show is that ideas and approaches to material and concepts and all of that get exchanged like hot gossip, which is what Hot Goss is short for. So a fun summer show. Very proud of it. It just will close. It will close as of Sunday of this week and this weekend, the 20th. So at 5 o'clock tomorrow, it's your last chance to go see Hot Goss. I highly recommend to go see it. So that's what I'm doing now. How did I get here? That's a big question. Let's see here. Let me just close this. So I wanted to start this presentation with a photo that my dad shot of me, who's actually here. This is me about age 10 in Sri Lanka. So my parents both did international aid work. My dad lived in Sri Lanka. We all lived in Sri Lanka in the early 80s. And then I went back, actually, this is probably more like 11, 12. I went back in the summer to visit my dad. And I'm wearing my Nicaragua shirt. I'm half Nicaraguan, and I am scribbling furiously in a notebook. Who knows what took me, but I was always inspired by something. My parents will tell you that I was very artistic growing up. And one of my mom's favorite things that I said when I was a kid, which I have yet to decipher, is let's make a tree. What does this mean? We can interpret it in multiple ways, but we can probably come back to that idea later. Needless to say, living in Sri Lanka was creatively just fantastic for me, I think. When I was a really little kid, I loved those tuk-tuk taxis, or even the big taxis that you could take around Colombo that were decorated on the inside with pictures and plastic flowers and lights. And if you got really lucky, you would get all of them kind of mixed together in one of these like outrageous kind of experiences that you get to take from one part of the city to another. And I remember asking my mom if we could decorate our car to look like one of these taxis with all of the gift wrap stuff that we had from the States. And she was like, you can decorate it and we can keep it in the garage area, but we're not driving around like that. And I was like, no, we have to drive around with all the stuff on the car. This was me in a nutshell. So you'll see the through lines, I think, because that's basically what I do now. Like, I just want to put on experiences and shows and do the most fantastical, wild things that you can get away with. So here's my very impressive, well, I say this like very self-deprecatingly, but it's kind of wild to look at this. I've been working in the arts now for 12 years. And yes, I went to John Cabot, which is in Rome, which was a fantastic place to earn an art history degree. I actually started out as an actor. So I have a background in theater, and I switched gears and decided to go into art history, thinking that there would maybe be a more stable career path for me that way. And from there, I went to Christie's in London, which sadly is no longer, it no longer exists. But the university program was actually accredited through the University of Glasgow. So still have the degree. And then my first job was actually at the Phillips Collection. I worked in education and interpretation. So I was working with adult audiences, taking people around, looking at exhibitions. But creatively, I really felt like I needed something else. So I'm going to tell you about that too. Oh, in between all of this, I also interned at the Peggy Guggenheim in Venice, which was amazing. And now I'm at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington, which if you're a DC area resident, you probably also know as Arlington Arts Center. And it has existed since 1974. And at its core, it was always an artist-founded institution for studios and creativity. So what I do now is actually very central to how it began as a place. This was the first show I ever curated. It was in 2011. This is an installation by an artist named Janelle Ola, and it was attached to the HVAC system in the gallery, a gallery that's no longer in DC called Flashpoint. This was the first time I'd ever put together something this large scale. So on the right, you see a picture of it in mid-installation, and then on the left is what the final installation looked like. And every time the AC would kick on, these sculptures would inflate and light inside. So it felt like this environment that was constantly breathing, which was very cool. So that was my first foray into curating. And bear in mind, I was also working a day job. My day job was at a museum. So I was interpreting art, and then I was working with living artists, which is kind of my thing. I'm married to an artist, Matthew Mann. He's a painter. And I have to give him full credit, because I think at the time that I was feeling the most creatively frustrated, he was like, well, you just have to do what I do, which is you have your job, and then you have to do the thing you want to do outside of your job. And so I think a lot of people who curate approach their careers a lot like artists do. And by the by, when people don't really understand what I do, they call me an artist, and I'm always like, not really. I don't have a studio. Like, I know what it is to be an artist, but as a curator, I feel like I work very closely with artists and understand their lives and the way they think. very intimately. So maybe half true that I'm kind of an artist. Okay, so this is in 2012. And behind me actually are some paintings by my husband, by Matt. He became part of the Hamiltonian Fellowship Program, actually. And so this is me attending their big group show that they have every year called New Now. And I'm watching a performance, and I had no idea that in 1 year I would be curating that exhibition because 1 year later I was the director of the space. So who would have known? This is what the building looked like back in the late 60s. Hamiltonian is in like what is known as the U Street corridor in DC, which is a historically Black neighborhood. And during the riots, after the assassination of Martin Luther King, it really became decimated. But the couple of structures still stood. On the left here, if you look, there's one that says Republic. There's a very famous club in the Black community called Republic Gardens that was like the place to go dance to soul and music of that sort. And I hope, I haven't been there in a really long time, actually, pandemic. Like I have to have my pandemic and parenting excuse here because I have no idea what the corridor looks like now. But on the right is the Hamilton building. So the organization was named after the Hamilton print press. You can see there's a print press in the mosaic up top. And it used to be an auto body shop. So the inside was like a blank canvas. It was pretty much ripe for interpretation. And it was suddenly my job to work with a group of 5 emerging artists, actually 10 emerging artists every year to curate exhibitions in this space. So I went from working in the museum world and interpreting art to doing something somewhat similar, but like making stuff with emerging artists. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of things that, actually quite a few things that I did when I was director there that are projects that are near and dear to my heart, but by no means everything that I did while I was there. So this is my first show, one of my first shows with an artist named Billy Freeble. And people ask me sometimes, well, how do you curate when you're only working with one artist? If you look on the left, Billy came to me with, I can't even tell you how many of these circle drawings. And he was like, I don't really know how to make sense of all this work I've made. What should we do? So I decided to make all of these drawings into little groupings of 3. And they were made with a machine that Billy had constructed out of found objects that he'd found on the side of the highway. We called this the current recorder. And what he would do is he would take these pieces of paper and put Sharpies, attach Sharpies, and every single day for months on end, he would record the conditions. When the wind would stop blowing, the markers would settle and they would bleed. When the wind would blow, the drawing machine would draw. And he would go to all the places where he'd found this detritus, basically. It was kind of like a little robot. And so this show ended up being like a recording of places and time through stuff that's just kind of left by the side of the road. So that was our first show. And that was the first time that I was like, I had no idea how I was going to make something out of this. And voila. Then you'll see as we go through this presentation that the artists, I sometimes feel like there was this funny bat call to creative people when I started working at this gallery. And suddenly artists were like, oh, there's something happening here. Like, I need to apply to this place. I want to get in. I have vision. And the most amazing people started to work. I started to work with the most amazing people. So this is Lisa Dillon. She made an installation that was supposed to feel like the furniture you would see in a mall, if you remember, like these courtyards where people would gather. But her theory is that contemporary culture has fewer and fewer ways for people to engage intimately with one another. And at the end of the day, we are descended of apes. So she's like, what if we had something that sort of doubled as like a grooming lounge, like you'd see at the zoo for animals, but like at a mall, which is a sort of contemporary way for people to gather. So this was our Aloe grooming lounge, where we had hairstylists come and groom people's hair, like you'd see people do in the ape house at the zoo. But it was fabulous. It was really fun. People got their hair trimmed. They got their hair braided. It was a real gathering place, and it was super fun. This is Larry Cook, who was actually one of the first Black artists who was part of the program. And we talked about him being one of the first Black males in the program a lot. He did a program called, or a show called From an Eighth to a Key, that had pictures of Black men in PhD regalia receiving degrees, and then very accomplished white men posing in front of the backdrops that you would see like at Go-Go's, which if you're a DC native, you know, is like where people would go and pose in front of like a hand-painted backdrop. It's a big party, basically. So sort of interesting, like race reversal, kind of role reversal thing that he was doing to sort of interrogate the places that we assume that we're going to see people of color and white people. Larry did not shy away from difficult topics pertaining to race. This is another piece of his, a neon piece. And it was one of the first times, I think, as a curator, where I had to like just hold on tight for some very difficult conversations that were necessary, that these kinds of exhibitions brought about. This is a very fun show that I did with an artist named Nauka Wasugi and her good friends, Jamie Warren and Matt Roche, who form a group called Whoop-De-Doo. Everything that you see in here was basically sourced, again, from garbage. They made this enormous birthday cake out of stuff. It's a paper mache birthday cake. They made it out of stuff that they found in and around the DC area, and invited local arts communities, or even just like after school programs, to come and construct it with them. So it's a big community endeavor. And that's what Whoop-De-Doo does. They take their inspiration from closed circuit TV shows from like the 80s. And they just bring a bunch of people together to do these wild projects. This project was inspired by, believe it or not, a Japanese game show that one of them had seen on YouTube. And we, right next door to us at Hamiltonian, had a group that did Kung Fu in a Kung Fu studio right next door. So Jamie and Matt were like, let's get the kids from the Kung Fu studio to do their dragon dance out of a birthday cake, and we'll just have a big performance. So I'm going to show you a video next from that performance. This is what it looked like. It's a little bit loud, so I might turn the sound down, but I just want to give you a vibe for what that show felt like. Let's see. It was all jokey. So it was like, the title of the show was Baffy Herb Day, which is happy birthday. Yeah. And the year was even wrong. So the whole thing was meant to be silly. Anyway. This is some of the local organizations that they did, that they partnered with. Okay, there's our notorious fire escape, like exit sign. And you can see there's kids in the cake. And they all come out. And they get ready to do their dance. I'm actually, I'll turn the volume on, but just be forewarned, it is very loud. I'll see if I can get it to, there we go. So I'm going to advance it a little bit. So they're waiting. They start. There's a whole audience behind them. They cut the cake with their sword. And then the drum roll starts. And then the dragon comes out. And there was confetti and a whole bunch of wild stuff. We did this performance a couple of times. It was great. And this is very community oriented, sort of a social practice collective that does things that exist completely outside of like the commercial realm. I mean, I'm sure that some of you are asking, even I'm asking as I look at this, how do they make money doing this? And the fact is that like, this is not art that sells, but it's about an experience. These are the kinds of artists that actually have gone on to do performances like this at art fairs for the likes of Jeffrey Deitch. And whenever you look at what Whoop-De-Doo is up to, the art world loves them. But they exist outside of sort of a very traditional way of thinking about what is economically viable and outside of commerce and capitalism in general. Art has always done that. It always gets consumed right back into it, of course. So, but that's a different topic. Okay. Oh, are you asking a question? Sorry, I didn't understand.
Yes, it felt disturbing suddenly to me that maybe the artists, obviously they must have been happy, but these children had nothing to do with the concept, the full line.
Well, no, the kids were very involved in the process of making, actually. So this was very much one of these projects where the kids were from the very beginning involved in the creation of even the gifts that you see on the left. Like they helped construct everything, choreograph everything, come up with the concepts. It was very like community based, and they loved it. So it was quite the opposite, actually. Okay. Then there were more traditional shows. This is a painting show by two artists, Alejandro Pintado on the left, who's a artist based in Mexico City, and Dan Perkins. Alejandro and I have remained friends, thankfully, and he is doing really interesting work in Mexico City. These were a series of paintings that he did that were from studios and studies of great thinkers with these neon objects inside. They're all graphite and acrylic painting. This is a piece by Jim Leach. This is a sculpture show called Hot Water. These were objects that had poetry written on the back of them or under, and you can see on the left on the underside, you had to really crane to be able to see it, but it was about access and denial and something very sort of metaphorical about like what we're allowed to see on the surface and what's underneath. This is a video still by an artist named Christine Neptune, who is now at MIT and has gone on to have some really amazing shows. She was curated into a group show at Gagosian not too long ago. And she started out really like announced herself at Hamiltonian, which was amazing. She had moved from Brooklyn to DC for 2 years to be able to participate in the program. I'm sorry I don't have a video of this piece. It's stunning. But this is how we showed it in the space on 2 large screens projected and then on tube TVs in the middle. And we had a wonderful talk with her and the curator of film and video from the, at the time, recently opened Namaque Museum, National Museum of African American History and Culture. So Christine is somebody that I have no doubt is one to watch. Very exciting. This is an installation by an artist named Reeves Wiley, who works both in painting and in installation. It is a very strange, wonderful installation called DIY Laser Eye Surgery. And what you're looking at is not a screen, it's a 3D trompe l'oeil installation with a fake human head with fake hair. Watching a video that Reeves made where she was kind of imitating YouTube stars that are doing tutorials, but in this tutorial you learn how to do your own laser eye surgery, which is gross and also very funny. It felt like something out of Pee-wee's Playhouse, if everybody remembers that show from the 80s. But it was very clever because you would encounter this installation and be completely confused as to what was real and what wasn't. And then, of course, the video is about altering your own vision. So the whole thing had this very cyclical kind of iterative message. We took this to an art fair in Miami, and I will forever regret that I did not make this happen. Actually, it's more like this happens when you go to art fairs, because I in my bio, Ian mentioned that I used to do art fairs, and I would take artists from within this program that had more traditional practices and sell their work. We took this installation to a very experimental fair called Satellite, and I took some other stuff that you could buy. But a collector from the Zabludowicz collection in London, if anybody is familiar with the Zabludowicz collection, she came and she was like, this is brilliant. Like, I must purchase it. She was the daughter of the founders of that museum. If you go online and look up the Zabludowicz collection now, you will see that they support emerging artists, not unlike Reeves. And maybe it's not too late and Reeves will one day be in the collection. Let's hope. Then there was, this is the same artist that was responsible for the birthday project, decided to make a critique of the institution. These are always fun to, I'm being sarcastic. These are always fun to have to chair or like run. This is a piece called Perma Counterculture. The artist decided to create this very minimal structure that looks like the kinds of minimalist sculpture you would expect to see at the NGA by Dan Flavin and Donald Judd, et cetera. Very clean, very macho, very large. But on the inside of it was a growing area where we had lights, like grow lights, and we were growing wheatgrass. And the idea was that you would harvest the wheatgrass and, well, you would play it punk music. This was a punk venue, it was a punk show venue. We had, over the course of a month, multiple punk artists come through, play music, and the idea was that they would help the wheatgrass to grow, and then we would do shots of wheatgrass and ingest the energy of punk through the wheatgrass and fortify ourselves. You can't really see it that great, but this is music happening inside the structure. There were some wild shows. I did not love running this show, I'm not gonna lie, because being the person to tell everyone to settle down is never fun. But there was no drinking allowed. It was all ages shows. And the energy was really contagious. So I look back on it fondly, but being the man is never fun. Then here's another large scale installation by an artist named Heather Clark, who was making a commentary about climate change. It was a work called An Edge of a Line. And she got all of these pieces donated by a storage space manufacturer, basically, and she coated everything in beeswax, and this entire wall would move back and forth on this track. It was really something, working with somebody who was able to outsource all of her objects and get funding and support to be able to actualize this. And I'm going to show you a video of what this piece looked like, because those walls moving back and forth on the track were anxiety inducing. And I think that was the entire idea, is that it felt like the whole thing was going to collapse on you. This is an artist named Rex de Lefgran, who's a good friend and helped me run the gallery for many years. And she's actually going to the Art Institute of Chicago to study sculpture and performance as we speak. So I knew her when, which is wonderful. You can hear that creaking noise. So the whole thing was really a metaphor for the precarity of our situation with climate change, and this sense of like impending. There was something about the way that this thing would pull apart and come together that made you feel like the walls were going to fall in at any moment. So my stint at Hamiltonian was magic. That was 7 years. And then I left. I started working with a collector who had always wanted to open a gallery. His name is Ryan Dattilo. This is De Novo Gallery. It was right by Union Market. It was a pop-up. This is one of several shows we put on in 2019. This is Synthetic Dawn with Alec Epstein and Esther Ruiz. Just some examples, more traditional object show. Although I will say, if you look on the right-hand side, that abstracted piece is actually made with cut-up yoga mats. So she uses found objects in a very novel way. And then I had a baby, and then it was 2020. I had my son in February of 2020, and it felt like a month later, the world exploded. This is a piece that was actually in a show that we just had at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington, that documented through a montage of images that are digital and things that circulated in print media, the days around the Black Lives Matter protests, all the way through the beginning of COVID, through Black Lives Matter protests to the present day. And it was a really difficult time. I was not employed. I was a new mother. I really had no idea what I was going to do, and it felt like the stakes were higher. I feel like this time ushered us as humanity into a new era. So it feels like you can't curate the same way. So the first show that I did, I actually
have a question.
I'm sorry?
This is your dad.
Yeah. Hi.
I just want to tell everybody that when your kids grow, you kind of lose track of them. And Amandita, I am so proud of you. You're doing so many great things. Wow. I didn't know. So this is amazing. Love you, girl.
Bye, puppy. Bye.
Okay.
Oh, are you staying? I hope you stay. I'm not done.
Okay.
I'm not done.
No, I might have to
I'm
leave
almost
in a
done
few
though,
minutes.
guys.
Okay,
with me
but
now.
I'll stay. But
Okay.
wow, Amandita, you're amazing.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Dad.
Rolando,
Okay, so-
this is Mariana. We'll have a recording for you.
Okay, great. If okay. So
Okay, please send it to me. I do want to see the whole thing, but
Cool.
I'll stay. I have about 10 more minutes.
great. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep going. I hope everyone's still with me. You guys still with me? Everyone good? Hope so. Okay. So I put something on Instagram. I have been dormant on Instagram for the past 6 months, so this is kind of surprising. But I put something on Instagram when I was like, what am I gonna do? You know, I was like, I have to find a job. I have no idea whether or not there's even a need for what I bring in this new era. And the response I got was actually from Blair Murphy, who is the curator of exhibitions at what is now the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington. And she was like, I need someone to help me run the show because we just lost our executive director. Can you run exhibitions and we will finish out your time with us with a show? And I was like, yes, of course, I'm happy to do this. So I started on part-time and ran exhibitions. And this is a show that I finally curated at the very end, which was very much a pandemic show with the artist that you see on the left. It was called We Can't Predict Tomorrow. This is a work that was in the show by an artist named Lee Davis, which was a psychomantium, which is a structure that you use or that grief practitioners use to help people cope with loss. So you can go inside and it's supposed to be kind of like a sensory deprivation space, but you can meditate on someone you've lost. Sorry, I'm getting choked up, but you know, it's intense. And it felt like the thing we needed at that time. And then there was also this installation that was done by an artist who is now part of the residency program, actually. Her name is Bahar Yurkoglu. And it was kind of funereal in tone. And it actually is based very much on the Tiffany windows, which you see on the left-hand side, that so many people know the Museum of Contemporary Art, Arlington for their original Louis Comfort Tiffany windows. And she made these floral installations that look like the kind of things that you would see at a wake. Incidentally, she had also become a mother at the same time that I did. And so much of this piece was a video that was very much about the transition into motherhood, the loss of a different self, but also becoming a mother in a pandemic, which is a weird experience to say the least. And then there was this wild portal by an artist named Tommy Bobo that it was actually a video piece down in the basement that was very psychedelic in tone. It sort of made you feel like you could just like get sucked into it. And it had a very haunting soundtrack. It was actually that he took the music from live concerts and slowed it down so that it became really ambient, because that was another thing that we lost in the early parts of the pandemic was live music events, which can be so transcendent. So he created this transcendent experience through audio and visuals that he sort of fed through an LED loop that ended up becoming like this portal to another world, basically. And then I got my full-time job where I run the residency program. So this is the gallery that I'm now responsible for programming. And this was one of the first resident artist shows that I got to work on with a wonderful artist named Nigara Kami. who is Iranian American. It was called Le Kaftan, Le Turban, and it was all about Iranian, well, it was about the appropriation of Iranian culture into Western culture. So she's got these famous screen sirens from the 60s and 70s clad in kaftans, looking very glamorous. And a very funny and interesting series of portraits at the very, very back of the gallery that were her in the style of Matisse, putting his muse Laurette in a series of turbans, because that's how he would exoticize her and paint her, even though she was Italian. He was like, what? And it's so fashionable to dress in turbans now, and that's how he would paint her. And so Negar was putting herself in that role and sort of thinking about this sort of art titan that she respects as a painter, but like the problematics of that as well. And she's like, I love Matisse, but he also did this, and he informed the way that I see myself and the way that we all see. This is another painting show by Sarah Hardesty that we organized. I'm just going to flick through real quick. And this is a very recent show by an artist named Rebecca Rivas Rogers called Gray View. I loved this show because it challenged people so much. This is the stuff that she just had in her studio, brought out and assembled in actually a very thoughtful way. And she has a background in landscape painting. She's Irish American, and she will tell you, like in the artist talks that we had for her, she's like, you know, here in America, your asphalt is gray and there's so many in-between spaces. It feels like everything is constantly under construction. And as a foreigner, I find that fascinating. So she finds her inspiration in the non-spaces of American landscape, and she collects stuff in her studio and stuff from around and kind of reassembles it in this constructed landscape. And that's exactly what this was. If you look very closely, you'll notice that there's, for example, this like orange meshing that you would see at a construction site, and then there's a painting of it kind of tucked in. And she will do this throughout the entire installation. So it's very kind of self-referential, but in a very tongue-in-cheek, funny way. And now we're back exactly. Oh, so that was the video that I was wanting to show you guys about some other videos. So we'll just skip that, not to worry. Like I mentioned, I've taken people to lots of artist studios. This was one of the studio visits I did in November of last year with some fantastic artists, Jackie Milad, who's got a piece at the Baltimore Museum of Art, Alex Epstein, whose work you saw in the gallery where I was working before, Amy Boone McCreesh, who was one of the first artists I worked with when I was at Hamiltonian, and then Jarrell Gibbs, who is like one of the big names in Baltimore now. He's represented by a really fantastic gallerist named Mariana Ibrahim in Paris. They're all in Baltimore, you guys, like the magic is in Baltimore. But the influence is in DC. So this is a funny role that we play, I think, culturally as a city, is like there's this very interesting artists kind of hub in Baltimore. There are places in DC. Mocha Arlington is one of them. It's hard to find space to make things. But I think that our role is to be able to facilitate vision, you know, and that happens in artist studios. And then we want people to support them. So I take collectors to meet them, see their work, and hopefully buy their work and support them in any way they can. And by the way, it's not just Baltimore that has cool stuff. This is a gallery that's in Arlington. It is a gallery called Friends. It is in the carriage house of a building in, I can't remember exactly the address, but it's maybe a 5 minutes drive from Mocha Arlington. And there is a curator / artist named Margaret Baca, who is in charge of this space. And she's got a design focus for Friends. This is Friends art space. I took a group here to see the show. On the right-hand side, you see the setup. It's called Mise en Place. And that was a show that was basically a large dinner party. And all of the work that you've seen here, from the flowers to the wallpaper to the chandelier to the vessels that you could use to eat, were made by fine artists. It was fabulous. You should definitely support her. She was just featured in the New York Times design section. And now we're back to where we started. I hope this all makes sense. Now you can see why I was a kid who said, let's make a tree. And I'm finishing with a photo that my mom took. Epic. My mom's here too. Hi, Mom. This was the sky a couple nights ago when we had one of these ridiculous storms blow through. I think it was late July. And my mom called and she said, did you see the sky? It had everything in it. it had stars and clouds and sunset and moon. And she sent me a photo, and I just think it's so surreal. It's hard to believe it's real. And that's my bag. So thank you.
Amazing, Amanda.
I'm ready for questions.
Yay. Do you want, even though we hate to lose this gorgeous picture, it'll be
Yeah.
on the video. And yes, I wanted you to
Yeah.
return so we can see you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Are there questions? I have one, but I don't want to preempt anybody.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
Since you've done such a wide range of curatorial work, have there been any moments, without naming names, obviously, where you've taken a risk to do a show and then you look at it after the fact and you're like, gosh, that didn't quite work? And then how do you deal with that?
Oh, for
Surely
sure.
that must happen.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, so much. Yeah, not everything is a resounding success. I mean, that's just like the nature of it. You have to take risks. I think that that's the beauty of a program like Hamiltonian, actually, is that it's there for risks to be taken. There's not a financial fallout if something like that doesn't work, but you have to have the come to Jesus conversation with the artist. And those are the hardest moments where you're like, something isn't working. And usually it's sensitive. I mean, it's hard to be an artist, and it's hard to balance that with life, bills, practicalities. And sometimes that can overshadow a person's ability to create. And I think more often than not, when shows didn't work, it was that was sort of clouding a person's ability to make. I believe in second chances, but definitely there were a couple of shows. They obviously were not the ones that I put in this presentation, although I have done shows where I'm like, this was definitely done. There's been a couple presentations I've given like that. But like moving forward from that, you learn. And hopefully use it as a teaching opportunity for yourself as a curator and also for the rest. Yeah.
Amanda, can I ask you a follow-up question to
Sure.
Ian's? And so if quote, it doesn't work in your estimation, what does that mean for the artist, and what might you tell them? And again, without naming names, of course.
Well, so that's a tough one because when you curate, there's a degree of sort of subjectivity that enters the equation. So what somebody thinks is great may not be what you think is great. And sometimes there's got to be a negotiation. I've definitely had to take moments where I take a step back and try to think about things from the artist's perspective. Sometimes the artist will come around, and sometimes the artist will say resolutely, no, like, this is my vision. I'm sticking to it. I'm sticking to my guns. That's part of the reason the artist is the artist, right? Is that they believe in their vision. And it's part of the characteristics of an artist. And I will tell you that, like, my husband has been my co-curator, editor, and sort of coach through this. As an artist, he'll sometimes tell me, like, Amanda, the reason this is so difficult is because that's what artists do. You tell them what you want to do and they're going to push against it, So it's not always easy. And as far as like having those conversations, I mean, sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not, and it takes time. It's not an instant thing. That's why the relationship matters so much. The Hamiltonian program is and was for 2 years. And it takes that long to really get to know someone and for them to trust you. Like, none of this would have happened if the artist didn't trust me first. So it took time to build that. And that is not always easy because, your different personalities, like, yeah, it's just part of it.
Amanda, can you talk a little bit about, sorry, I have a couple of things that just first and foremost, your husband's work's awesome. I know it pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
But so tell him he has a fan. But
cool.
Can you talk a little bit about the program for the resident artists at MoCA, and like, how long is it and what are the criteria, things
For
like
sure.
that?
Yeah. I'm actually in the process of, hopefully within the next week, announcing who will be in the program next. And so there's 2 types of residencies that you can do at MoCA. There's a 9-month-long residency, which is the short term. It goes from May until September. And that's a shared studio that's 600 square feet total. And I mean, anybody who's living in the DC metro area knows that a space that large is hard to come by for the rate that we're paying, that the artists are paying, the studios are subsidized. It's like $1 and change per square foot. So generally speaking, most of the artists are paying somewhere to the tune of $300 for a 300 square foot studio, give or take, plus utilities. So it's a really good deal. You can't find studios that affordable and that nicely maintained. I mean, there's AC, huge windows, heat. You're artists, so you understand this is not a given. I've done many studio visits with no heat in the dead of winter, and every item of clothing I had and a shot of whiskey. So, so anyway, 9-month-long studio is the short-term space in the 9-month-long studio. And then there's a 2-year-long residency. The process is basically that every single person who wants to apply submits what you would normally do for any other like workspace, 10 images, your bio, an artist statement. We really want to make sure that the artists understand they're joining a community. So we ask for an engagement statement also. I organize once a month meetings. I check in with the artists every Friday. And we want them to understand that they are creating a group and a community within this residency program. So I really try to emphasize that as part of the application process. The artists actually choose each other. So they have a rubric that they use to evaluate the artist based on artistic merit and then their statement of intent. The artistic merit carries the most weight, so 70 points out of 100. And they are things like contemporary relevance, engagement with contemporary concepts, mastery of craft, willingness to take risks. So we break it down point by point with a certain point value ascribed to each. If the artist wants to be that dogmatic about it, they can choose someone based on that. But a lot of it comes down to instinct and appeal, you know? So the artists get ranked, there's a top 10, and then I interview the artist with the executive director and choose the people that we think will be the best fit for the short or long-term studio respectively. And that once they're in the program, they're really kind of working towards a solo exhibition, but they have space. It's a 24/7 access type of space, and an opportunity to get to know artists in different disciplines from within the program. I also try to organize once every 6 months a visit with a guest curator or someone in the art world so that they can get exposure beyond just the group internally. It was a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, I mean, can people come and visit them? They have office hours kind of thing?
So the artists have open studio hours. We encourage them to have their studios open for every exhibition opening that we have, which is usually once quarterly, although our program is starting to change. So we might be open all the time. We'll see. We'll see. It's a small but very ambitious organization. So yeah, most of the time when we have exhibition openings on a Saturday night, the artists will have their studios open. And then there's other opportunities for them to keep their studios open. A couple of our artists will be participating in Arlington Visual Artist Studio Tour, a VAST. That's on September 23rd, actually, the same day I'm taking people to see Hediye. But during the day, the studios will be open, or a couple of them for participating residents. And then, yeah, that's just one of those things. If you have classes, if your group wants to come, you can schedule a visit and we will make it happen. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you.
Hey, Amanda, I don't know if you can see the chat, but Mariana was asking if the applicants for the residency have to be Arlington residents or if it's broader than that.
No. Oh, yeah, I see that. Thank you for pointing that out. No, they don't. Although certainly with the amount of engagement that we want the artists to have with one another, it doesn't hurt. The artists are asked to work at the front desk for now for 4 hours a month, in addition to the monthly meetings and having their practice. And as you know, I mean, most of our artists are working full time. They're doing adjunct teaching jobs or they have a day job. So getting to the studio and making work, it probably for your life will be easier if you're somewhere within the area. So I do think that somebody like who lives in Baltimore would have a pretty big challenge, but we would never say no to someone if they've got the will. So yeah, ideally in the DC metro area.
And Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about how it's funded and how it's supported? And is it a nonprofit? I imagine it is.
Yes, it is.
And also if there's a relationship with a torpedo factory or not.
We don't, to my knowledge, there's not a formalized relationship necessarily. We're obviously neighbors. But from what I understand, actually, the Torpedo Factory's residency program is very open doors, whereas the one at Arlington is, we try to have our residents open the doors when they can, but it's a much more private type of space. And depending on what the artist is comfortable with, they would do that. So not a formal relationship with the Torpedo Factory. Yes, the Museum of Contemporary Art Arlington is a 501c3. It is funded by a combination of donations, corporate sponsorship, and grants. So all of the above.
And your grants are mostly from the state?
I want to say a combination of the county and state. Yes. Yeah. And actually part of the branding and the change of the brand had to do with confusion, because we are in a county building, but as an organization, we are not the same as Arlington Arts. So that's where the Museum of Contemporary Art Arlington name came from. Not to mention that there's a really robust exhibition program that I think people may not always associate with what is traditionally thought of as an arts center. So it sort of gives a little bit more clarity, I think, for what the organization does. And it really, I mean, I must say, when I came in that interim period in the COVID era, early COVID, I was shocked at just how much space there is. I mean, it's a museum housed in a former school. And there's an education program, just like the one that I experienced when I was at the Phillips Collection. There's an extensive art class offering, there's exhibitions, and then of course there's a residency program. And actually the organization has just partnered with Amazon, so we will have a second location at Amazon's HQ2 that is going to it's actually going to complete construction, I want to say, in November or December of this year. And there will be another residency program there that's a little more like the one from the Torpedo Factory, but that's still being ironed out.
Wow, thank you.
Wow. I was thinking, Amanda, how much your work is like that of an artist, but your palette is other artists.
Yeah, I was, it's funny. I was like, there's a book that came out this year by the record producer, Rick Rubin. I don't know if you all are familiar. Rick Rubin was responsible for some of the most iconic hip hop albums and some punk albums actually in the 90s, and even recorded some of Johnny Cash's last recordings acoustically. And when you see the roster of who he's worked with, you're like, this guy just knows like what's good. And he wrote a book about the creative act. And I've listened to him speak. He's kind of a guru. I mean, really. And when you hear him talk about art, you know that he gets it from a very sort of personal place. And I'm like, if I have some legacy, I hope that people think of me in some way like a Rick Rubin for artists.
Waiting for your book.
Maybe one day. We'll see.
Awesome.
Oh, I wanted to put the stuff about what I'm doing in the chat. So let me do that while we're wrapping up.
We can also add it to, so you have an ACO page, just like all the artists that we interview, and we can post it on that. Just send it to me in an email.
Great. Yeah.
And then it'll be really easy for people to access. Yeah.
Come to our next
Totally.
But it would also be nice to add it to the video. If you you can, would you mind putting, or is it on your website perhaps, and that can link people?
You mean on MoCA's website? Yes, all of it will be. We're in this transition phase because this is our closing weekend for our current exhibitions. But September 9th, all of our new shows open. September 23rd, we have open studios and we're going to Hedia Studio. September 27th, we're going to be doing a gala. So with a silent auction. And It's kind of a crazy time, but this is good.
You're not busy at all.
I'm also curating with Blair Murphy the silent auction and not silent, but a sale, basically an exhibition with the Washington Project for the Arts. That's in October. So I'm in the process of doing that too. But we'll have new
Wow.
artists. It's a busy time.
And you
Very
said
cool.
something about November. I thought I heard you say November 23 or something. You're
That's
taking
September
part.
23rd is our open
Oh,
studio. Yes, and our visit to see Hedia Ilchi, Breeze Block Studios, and Kensington, Maryland, Pazzo Fine Arts. Yeah, there's still tickets for that. So if you'd like to join, it would be great to see you in person.
Well, this
Great.
was unbelievable, amazing. I think we want to hear more from you. Perhaps if
thank
you would
you.
join us in the future.
Well, yeah,
We'd love
that
to
sounds
have
great.
you. And
Cool.
also we have part of our program is to have artists who have been guests nominate other artists and maybe introduce them, and they get a little stipend
Wonderful.
as long as our grant continues.
Well, I know lots of those. So no problem. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. It means so much to me to be able to do this. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Amanda.
you.
Bless you and Ian, because you are broadening our scope and our minds. So we really, really appreciate it. Before we end, I also want to invite people to the next couple of exhibits. And I'm terrible at the name of an abstract minimalist named Emon Surakitkoson,
I think it's
who is from
Surakikotsun.
Thailand,
Yeah,
coming up on September 2nd.
second.
And then Teresa Oaxaca on September 16, following that. So just invite your friends, please. And remember, we're functioning as a nonprofit and we do depend on some contributions from people if you are so kind as to consider it. And they would be made to Glen Echo and then funneled to our program. And we really want to thank everybody for coming, and please stay tuned to the links that Amanda will provide for us. So
you want me to
can-
do that now in this or on the webpage after?
If you have one, it would be great if you
Great.
could put it in the
Yeah.
chat.
Can do.
Thank you, and we won't end just yet until you do that.
Okay, well, so here's this. I will say, I don't think that the new exhibitions have been put up on the website yet. But they will. So this is the one event that I'm doing that is live. Let me see if we have anything else up while I'm looking around here. Yeah. Just remember September 9th. Sorry, guys. The 23rd is the only thing that I have ready to go.
Great. You can add others later.
Sounds
So I
good.
want to thank everybody for attending. Any other questions last minute? Don't want to miss your important questions. Could we send you by email if there's that
Yeah.
possibility?
By all means,
That would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for your mom and dad for attending, and all
Mom.
your
Abby.
supporters. And hopefully we will help broaden that group and get you known by us and more.
Cool.
Thank you
guys
so much, everybody.